Did you know that 74% of moms around the world would prefer to have a flexible remote job than a traditional in-office job? I know, remote work sounds like the dream because, you get to work from home, look after your kids, etc., etc. But did you also know that a whopping 56% of remote workers report having a higher level of stress than their traditional in-office counterparts? And the reason for this stress is because there is a lack of boundaries between your work and your life. For moms, this percentage is probably even higher because not only do we have the full-time job that we are doing remotely, we also have the overtime job of managing our households, raising our kids, taking care of our spouses if we have them, being a daughter, being a sister, being a friend, maybe you're active in church, etc., etc. The list is never ending. And so it's safe to say that when you choose to be a remote work from home mom, you really need to have a high level of resilience. So in this video, I want to dive into what does it actually mean to be resilient. And I want to share with you 9 strategies that I have used for myself to build resilience in my over 7 years working mostly remotely from home. But before I get into my 9 strategies to build resilience, let me tell you a story about the time I almost quit my current job the day before I was supposed to start. Hi, if you're new here, my name is JoJo. It stands for Josephine. If you care, cool. If you don't, you're still welcome here. Now, let's dive into the story about how I almost quit, because I promise it's relevant when it comes to this idea of building resilience. Now, littlest bit of backstory. I have worked for the last 7, almost 8 years, mostly remotely as a digital marketer. But at some point I got really burnt out and I decided to make a complete pivot in my career, and I'm now working as an executive assistant. And with the job that I'm currently working, it's a full-time job. I'm working with a founder who is based in Europe and it's fantastic. But the day before I was supposed to start, I was this close to making the decision to just be like, hey guys, thanks for the offer, but I'm going to have to say no thank you. Here's what happened. So a friend of mine sent this job to me back in November of 2024. Now in November 2024, I had a baby who wasn't even 2 months old. And so one day at 2 a.m. and after nursing this child back to sleep and I'm wide awake, I'm like, hey, I'm here anyways. Let me go ahead and apply for this job. I decided to apply for the job. Now, I didn't expect to actually get the job until January of this year because, most recruitment processes can take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. Shock on me when I was given an offer letter within 10 days. I was not ready. I remember during the interview with the HR, she even asked me why are you applying for a job with a newborn? And in my mind, I was still naive thinking oh yeah, no, she's almost 2 months. And so by the time I get started, she's going to be 3 months. So I'm going to be good. Yeah. Turns out that I was just deluding myself. Sprinkle in some major personal challenges that were going on at the time, and let me tell you, I was ready to quit. At that point in my life, I was like, can I please press pause? Can I go request a medically induced coma so I can just exit my life temporarily and then wait for things to cool down and come back? That's how stressed I was. But the thing is, I had to push through. This opportunity had come my way, and as chaotic as the timing felt, I just knew that I had to do it. There was no quitting. And that right there is the definition of resilience. And so this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, where I'm thinking to myself wow, I did all that. I am doing all that. Listen, as much as I was ready to quit the job before I started, 4 months in, I actually feel like I'm starting to thrive. The job is going well. My 2-month-old is now 5 months old, and my other kids are doing well as well. And I'm managing those personal challenges. So basically, I'm kind of I'm not dead. I'm still here, and I'm actually headed my life is trending upwards right now. And when I thought about how it is that I'm still able to be here, I realized it all basically boils down to resilience. Now, some of you might be watching this and thinking to yourself oh, that's so nice for you. You get to work from home and manage your stress, blah, blah, blah. Resilience must come naturally to you. And the thing is, no, it really doesn't. The lie you might be believing at this point is that resilience is a character trait, but the truth is it's not. Resilience is a skill, and it's a skill that anyone can learn if you decide to learn it. And so that's basically my whole point of this video. I did some self-reflection and thought of different ways that I've been able to build resilience for myself. And while I cannot claim to have reached the actual peak of resilience, I know that I've learned enough that I feel like I can share with you, and hopefully you can find it helpful. Okay? To tell you about the very first strategy, let me first go back into 2024 and give you a little bit more context again about my career switch. So I started to feel very dissatisfied with my career as a marketer in, I think, 2023. So I was kind of in that space by the time 2024 started of like, okay, I need to pivot my career, new year, new me. But then new year, new me found me getting fired from a very, very lucrative freelance job. It was the first time actually in my whole life that someone had just fired me just like that. That's a whole other story I'll get into a whole different time, because I had lessons to learn from that. But not only did I get fired, I also found out I was pregnant with my third baby. Now, my previous 2 pregnancies were pretty smooth sailing. I'm one of those annoying people who are like, oh yeah, no, I enjoy my pregnancy, I like being pregnant, blah, blah, blah. The third one was like, girl, you're gonna learn today, okay? So yeah, I had very low blood levels, and so I was exhausted. And then also my first 2 pregnancies happened when I was in my 20s. This one found me smack dab in my mid-30s. And listen, guys, if you're listening to this and you're younger than 30 and you're thinking of having kids, don't believe the scammers that tell you that you need to first have money before you have kids. Have your kids. The money will come, okay? Anyways, so I was exhausted. So not only was I jobless and exhausted from my pregnancy, my 2 older kids were also being homeschooled, and I was their primary teacher. And because I had no job, I had no money to hire any other resources, I had to shop for these kids. Listen, when I tell you that I had to accept the fact that if I manage to homeschool these kids for 30 minutes in a day, I am winning in life. If I hit 2 hours of homeschooling these kids, I have basically climbed and reached the peak of Mount Everest. And that concept of it's okay to do just a little bit brings me to my very first strategy, what I'm calling your minimum viable action strategy. At some point when you're having to build resilience, especially during the hard times, you need to decide for yourself, what's the smallest little action that I can take to keep me moving forward in this whole process? Now listen, it's easier said than done, but trust me, it wasn't. Let me give you a picture of the kind of person I am. I am a neurodivergent firstborn who also happens to be academically gifted, and therefore had all the expectations of the world placed on me from a young age. And now just put a little layer of icing called abandonment issues on that cake, and you have the ultimate perfectionist. That's who I am. So this idea of starting small is counterintuitive to my entire being. Like, I am the go big or go home, and when you go big, do it perfectly, okay? There's no other way. That's who I am. Listen, when I tell you in 2024 I was humbled to my core, I had to learn how to be okay with doing the bare minimum. And that was basically how I spent all of 2024. And I kid you not, I honestly believe it set me up for where I am right now, where I'm able to wake up in the morning and be like, okay, this is the bare minimum that I need to hit today in order to be successful. Some days I have more energy than others. Some days I have more bandwidth. Some days my minimum can actually be a bit higher than the day before. But the point is I showed up. And the point of resilience is you show up even when things are hard. Trust me, it's hard to show up when you're trying to do something big. But if you shrink it down to something that's really tiny, to your minimum viable action, then it becomes a lot easier to show up. And you do that over time, and next thing you know, you've built that resilience muscle. So now you might be wondering, like, okay, great, that worked for homeschooling, but what about the rest of your life? I mean, you needed, like, your kids needed to eat, you needed a clean house, you needed to go shopping, etc., etc. That brings me to my second principle. Get help, even if it costs you money. I am the kind of person, remember, perfectionist me? I'm the kind of person who resisted having a nanny or a house help in my space for a long time. One, because I'm socially awkward. I don't like dealing with people. Like, people's emotions are too much. Two, because most people, when they hire help, it's usually, I hope I don't sound bad when I say this, but like, people tend to hire low-level, non-thinking, uneducated people to do house help. And the reality is, like, because of all the chaos that exists in my head, having to deal with people who can't think for themselves or who aren't proactive is not something I'm willing to do. It's hard enough for me to deal with my kids, let alone an adult who is thinking at the level of a child. And so I've resisted the idea of hiring a household because the norm is that you basically hire someone for a very low, very, very, very low wage per day. And so at some point I realized, like, okay, this pregnancy is whooping my behind. Like, I would spend literally 12, 14 hours a day in bed, and that's not counting nighttime. Okay, then math doesn't math, but you get the point. I would spend most of my days in bed. I'm like, life has to continue. And so I had to basically bite the bullet to hire help. But what I did differently was, I was like, okay, because I know myself and I can't deal with uneducated people who don't think, and I swear, I hope I really don't sound bad, but like, this is just my reality, okay? I was like, I'm going to have to bite the bullet and find someone who has at minimum completed high school, is competent, can think on their feet. So I asked around, and I knew I was going to have to pay a premium for someone like this. But eventually someone was recommended to me, and she came in and she's perfect. She's been with me. I think we're past a year at this point. We're just past a year. So she basically would come in 3 times a week, help me clean the house. And that was like the biggest task, because at the time I was living in a really big house. That's a whole other story. But she'll help me clean the house, help me prep my veggies, and then I would also have my husband to cook most of the meals, which was delightful because I don't like cooking. So yeah, but the point is, I had to bite the bullet and pay a premium for the kind of help that suited me and my personality and my preferences. And again, remember, I didn't have a job, I didn't have an income, so don't ask me where this money was coming from. I will tell you a different day. Listen, y'all, it was wild, but it taught me a really valuable lesson. If you're gonna build resilience, you also need help. You're not Superwoman. Okay, some of you are looking at me right now and thinking like, well, duh. Like, there's some of us who, like I explained, just getting help is hard for me. Like, in my mind, no one can do things the way I do them, but I had to learn to get help in order for me to build resilience, in order for me to take a step back. This was definitely a very high price tag, but I chose not to look at it as an expense. I chose to look at it instead as an investment in my future. And this also now brings me to my next strategy. You need to have a strong why. Now, I know it's cliche. Simon Sinek has said start with why for years on end, and everybody basically is regurgitating it. But the reason it's become a cliche is it's because it's true. The reality is, when you have a strong why, it gives you a reason to keep pushing through the chaos. And trust me, the chaos will come. Even Jesus told us in the Bible. What did Jesus say? In this life, you will face many troubles, okay? That is what Jesus said. The truth is, things are going to get hard. And when they do, you need something to hold on to that will keep you going. And your why is what will keep you going. So for me personally, one of my whys is obviously my kids. And as cliche as that sounds, like, let me explain. Specifically why it's my kids is, in my mind, the best thing I can do for my kids is to be an ever-growing version of myself. And in order for you to grow, you need to be in a state where you're constantly learning how to overcome challenges. And speaking of challenges, lifelong learning is actually another way to build resilience. So before I dive into this idea of always be learning something new, I want to read to you a statistic. According to a 2018 study published in the Motive Academy Hulk Bilimi Dargasi, I don't know what language that is, but just go with it. I'll link it in the description below, thanks. Mothers who engage in lifelong learning not only enhance their own skills, but also significantly influence their children's educational outcomes, shaping their success and contributing to the growth of society as a whole. This is exactly what I mean when I say the best thing I can do for my kids is to always be learning. If my kids can see me facing a challenge, figuring out a way to overcome it, then it makes a lot more sense for me to go back to them and tell them when they're learning something new, like, hey, it's hard right now because you don't know how to do it, but push through and it will get easier. The only way you're going to learn how is if you try it. And if they constantly see me doing that, then they're going to be able to believe me, because in case nobody ever told you, your kids will always learn more from what they see you do than from what you tell them. Wild. I mean, just think about it for yourself. What are some of the things that you do in your life and you're like, why do I do that? Here's a tip. Go back and examine the people who raised you, and you'll realize why you do some of the things the way you do them. And like, it's not like they even told you like this is how you should do things. Like sometimes it is, but most of the time it's just because that's how they live. It's this habit of constantly learning that has helped me to build the resilience, especially during the hard times of being in a remote career. Because trust me, there's so much to learn when you're having to do a remote career. For me, I've had to learn things like how to show up on video, during video calls, like etiquette for video calls, how to speak properly. Basically, I've had to learn and adapt in so many different situations. And yeah, this mentality of constantly learning is one of the tools that I definitely can say has helped me to build resilience over time. And the reality is, like, this is just kind of the season that I'm in. I have a 5-month-old, a 5-year-old, and a 10-year-old. Like, I need to make things work somehow, somewhere. Like, that is just my season. And speaking of seasons, acknowledge your season and adapt to it. Given the season that I'm in right now, this lesson is so key for me right now. Like, again, I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I am the ultimate perfectionist. If I were God on his throne, I would freeze my babies in that gap between 6 months and 2 years, when they are adorable and everything they do is cute and they love me 100% and they will follow me everywhere and they'll do everything I say and they'll just be like, you can do no wrong. I would freeze them there. But that's not the case. Right now, my kids are at varying different ages with varying different needs. And at some point, I'm going to have a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 15-year-old. That's a child, a preteen, and a teenager. Listen, you guys, that season is coming for me and I'll have to change my ways until then. But like, that's the point. Resilience means recognizing what your season is and adapting the way you live to make it work. Okay? That's just the way it is. But now that doesn't change the fact that some of those seasons are going to be even harder, which is where you need to find friends that you can be real with. You know, those friends who will get down in the mud with you. Like, they won't simply pick you up. They'll first get in there, wallow in it with you, and then figure out a way for you guys to get yourselves out of it together. You need friends like that in your life, because let me tell you, again, I can't get into the details of how hard this season of mine has been. But when I tell you, like, I have my 2 people in my corner that I'm like, guys, here are the exact step-by-step reasons and details of why this season is hard and I want to quit everything. I have my 2 people who are there to just be like, listen, we feel you, we're crying with you, we're angry with you, we're hopeful with you. And also, by the way, in this particular situation, you are setting yourself up for failure, so get yourself up and keep going. You need those people in your life. The best way you can build these relationships is you need to take the first step. It's scary as all heck, but you need to be vulnerable. And the added benefit of that is when you find someone that you can be vulnerable with, you open up the space for them to be vulnerable with you. And when you have that mutual level of vulnerability and authenticity, you're able to grow with each other and support each other through the hardest of times. You might not be able to solve each other's problems, but the fact that you simply have someone who's there with you makes all the difference in the world. There's a reason that church is called to be a community. Nobody was meant to do anything by themselves. Okay? The only criteria really for you to select these people is you need to be able to trust them enough to know that they're your friends without any specific agenda out of the relationship. They're just there because they love you and they care for you. And it's the same thing for you. It's scary to open up to people. But the thing is, the only way you're going to have these relationships is if you take the first step and allow yourself to be vulnerable with someone. Like, trust me, it's scary. Perfectionist introvert. I want to control everything and every situation in my life. But listen, at some point, it just became literally impossible for me to handle anything by myself. And similar to how I resisted the idea of getting house help, I also resisted the idea of giving people the impression that anything could be wrong. It's like, no, everything's fine. Like this, I had to quit. And I don't think I would have made it through the season without like 2 of my friends. And like, I know they're watching. And it's like, girls, you know yourselves, okay? If you're really confused about where to start, the next strategy is going to help you with everything else that I just talked about, which is to pray and rely on God's strength. Listen, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. And I'm also not going to lie and say that I am doing this as often and as consistently as I would like. But the truth is, without God, what's the point? Like, genuinely, what's the point? It's important for us to take time to pray. It's important for us to take time to read the scripture. It's important for us to take time to learn how to think biblically, because also, listen. This is a whole video for another day, but I have learned over the years that there's some wonky teachings out here in these church streets. And yeah, learn how to actually read and study your Bible, and like actually learn about the God of the Bible, as opposed to trying to find like little life nuggets that a life coach would have given you, but then slapped with an air of Christianity and like, let's call that faith. No, that's not the version we're going for. We're going for the version that is hard, that is raw, that is real, that reminds you that at the end of the day, you are not on the throne, but God is. And if you keep that truth at the center of it all, you will then recognize that whatever season you're going through that is requiring you to have the highest level of resilience, God is still in control of it. And B, because He's in control of all of it, you can trust that at the end of the day, it is all for His good will for your life, as hard as it may be. Lord Jesus, like one day we're going to talk about all the hard things, one day. But God is on the throne. So, at the end of the day, if you decide that you're going to be that mom who is working remotely from home, you need to work on your resilience. And when did you stop recording? No! And it was at this point that my phone camera stopped recording video, but I was recording my audio separately. So for the remainder of this video, I'm going to insert some clips from early last year at the very beginning of my pregnancy, where my powers of resilience had to come through. We had an event to go to that was Ankara themed, and my daughter didn't have a single on-theme outfit to wear. So I had no money to buy her anything, but I did have a sewing machine and... Hey, sweetie, it's my turn to talk. I have a machine and I had some fabric that my mother had gifted me. So with some few tutorials to help me through sewing a dress for a child, which I had never done, I was able to make her dress. I think it's pretty awesome that I have these clips of me sewing, because I think they're very appropriate for the theme of this video, which is resilience, because these clips encompass a lot of what I was talking about. It was a tough situation. I had to persevere. I had to get resourceful. I had to learn new skills on the fly, and so enjoy. In many cases for me it has happened unintentionally, but the more I'm growing, the more I'm realizing, like, if we're intentional about building this resilience, then honestly we can be unstoppable. Then we can have much lower levels of stress and depression than most people that don't have resilience. In fact, let me give you another statistic about that. According to a global study published in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology in 2024, individuals with higher resilience experience an average reduction of 27% in depression and a 14.3% increase in productivity, underscoring the profound impact of resilience on mental well-being and work outcomes. Listen, resilience is not an option if you decide to work from home. It is an absolute requirement. It has served me well, it is continuing to serve me well, and it will serve you well as well. How many times can I say well in one sentence? So yeah, being a remote work from home mom is not easy, but if you build up your resilience, it is absolutely worth it. And at the end of the day, it's not just good for you, it's good for your kids, and ultimately it's good for society. So if you want to see what resilience looked like for me one day when I was working this remote job of mine, check out this video where I was testing out a new AI to work on a project that was driving me absolutely insane, but like I was resilient and I was able to finish it. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.